guys, I just wanted to go over the difference between stock coilovers, Bilstein coilovers, and spacer lifts, which I do not have available for this video because the last set that came through the shop I went ahead and threw away because they're complete junk, and I don't want to see people having to replace their stock coilovers as a result of the damage that the spacers cause. We'll go ahead and flash a picture on this video to show what a stock coilover looks like, and the picture will also show basically this stilt collapsed into the shock as a result of running a spacer lift. Essentially, a spacer lift makes the distance from this eyelet to the mounting point of the coil bucket longer. When this whole strut assembly collapses, the truck was designed to have a certain distance between the top of the coilover and the eyelet of the lower part of the shock. And the bump stops, the suspension travel, everything is limited based on the distance between here and here at full bump. And by putting a spacer on there, you're making the space between here and here obviously bigger by the width of that spacer without changing the space between the lower arm and the coil bucket on the truck. So what essentially happens is the suspension comes up and collapses and crunches the stock coilover, causing this this stilt, if you would, to collapse up into the shock. And that's why spacer lifts are bad, because you when you just put them on there, you crunch your stock shock. The way around that is to extend the bump stop, and we'll go ahead and flash a picture of the bump stops on a stock Tundra in this video somewhere in order to show you. Look, we'd have to unbolt the bump stop, we'd have to weld in a spacer, and then bolt the bump stop back in. Well, after you pay for that type of fabrication, you're into the lift spacers for what, a couple $100? And then if you spend $200-300 to have your bump stops extended, what's the point of going the cheap route now? You might as well do the Bilsteins and do everything right. There's no point in half-assing it when you can have it right for the same money or less, you know? So that's my rundown on a spacer lift. Let's get into why the Bilsteins are such a great value for the money. So essentially, on the Bilsteins, you're going to use your stock coil hat that comes on every stock coilover. You're going to use the stock coil, but then you're going to take this junk strut and throw it away. And then all of that stuff, after you compress the spring, remove the top hat, take the coil off, it all goes onto our Bilstein strut. If you'll notice here, there's these rings machined into the body of the shock. So you take this clip off and you move it to each of the rings. The lower down the ring is on the strut, the less lift you're going to achieve with the setup. By moving the ring up to the higher settings, it puts more preload against the spring, essentially making it act like a slightly stiffer spring, which gives you lift, firms up the ride just a little bit. It kind of counter offsets the additional ride height, or the raise in center of gravity, because obviously when you raise your center of gravity, it makes the body roll a little bit worse in the vehicle. Well, by putting essentially a stiffer spring on the vehicle, you're offsetting that body roll by giving more resistance against the suspension. So, and it makes the truck ride a little bit firmer, but feel more controlled when you're on the streets. Another thing that I wanted to show everybody, I can't unfortunately show you on the coilover what I'm going to show you here, but because I'd have to disassemble the coilover and I'm actually saving these. These are off of my 2013 Tundra. They maybe have 200 miles on them, and then I replaced them for some aftermarket shocks. So I'm not going to take these apart. However, the stock rear shock is worth noting here, because you can notice I can actually push that down with one hand. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to push that down. And then when you pull it back out, it's a little slower to bring back out. Essentially what Bilstein, or what Toyota is doing, is they use very minimal compression valving, just enough to make the vehicle feel controlled on the street, but then they use a whole lot of rebound valving in order to keep the truck from bouncing around. The problem with this is when you get out in the dirt and go off-roading, you don't have as much bottom-out resistance as you could. It makes it a slightly smoother ride, but you lose a lot of that control. With the Bilstein shock, they've got everything valved correctly. As far as the style of suspension they're trying to do, it's a very good compromise between the street and the dirt. It actually is much more difficult to press down and to compress compared to the stock. There's absolutely no way I'm going to compress that with just one hand. I actually am almost afraid of the table collapsing. Wouldn't that actually be funny if it did? Because it takes so much effort to push down on the shock. Two reasons for that: they've got more nitrogen in there, which is good, because that keeps the dividing piston and keeps the actual shock valving bathed in oil a lot more, and it gives you a little bit additional, essentially compression valving, so it gives you a much firmer, more controlled ride when you're off-road. And then if you'll notice, if we can get these compressed, they actually, I don't know if I can show it here. Yeah, you can see that definitely. You can actually see that they rebound much more quickly than stock does. So they're much more aggressively valved. You can see how much faster that pulls out compared to the stock one. So basically, if you're going down a bumpy dirt road, the extra compression valving is going to absorb the bumps instead of letting the wheel travel blow right through the compression valving like what the stock one does. So it's going to absorb that bump, and then if you get into a situation where you're hitting a pothole or a dip or something like that, because it's got very light, because the Bilstein has very light rebound valving, the wheel is going to drop out very quickly into the hole, and then it's going to have all that compression valving to go ahead and absorb that bump. So the truck is much more controlled, whether it be a potholed, a street, or a bumpy dirt road, or even very small whoops, say out in the desert, for example. So that's the rundown on these Bilstein shocks. The valving is much better. The nitrogen is much better. It's a much better way to lift the front of the truck. You're not going to destroy your shocks just simply by bottoming out and going down a dirt road. They're going to actually handle quite a bit of abuse before you need to upgrade into something like Kings or Icons or something like that. So there's the rundown on the Bilstein shocks. Thanks for watching. For more information on the Bilstein 5100 shocks or 07 and newer Tundra, please go ahead and click on this link right here, and we'll be good for it. Thank you.